You're watching CCN, Clarksville Community Network, produced by Goodwin Productions. Powered by CDE Lightband.
Well, great. You know, I speak all over the country, literally, and not often that I have the opportunity to speak to young people, but I'm delighted that you're here to hear this old 93-year-old World War II Marine. Yes. And I have to tell one little something that just happened recently. You know, when I see a veteran, especially if he's got his name on him someplace, you know what I do? I point at him. I was down in Birmingham, Alabama not long ago, and they were taking me on a tour through Birmingham, and there were veterans, and finally they came on the speaker, Mr. Harrel. They estimate over 80,000 people. This happened to be Veterans Day. And okay, I'd see a veteran, you know what I would do? I'd point at him. And if he pointed back at me, he knew that I'm pointing at him, and he would point back. You know what I'd do? I'd give him a thumbs up. He'd give me a thumbs up. And when he did that, you know what I did? I saluted him. And I saw so many Vietnam veterans. Now, as I said, I travel the country literally telling the story. I'm booked up through November already this year. But I have to take you back a long ways. I'm going to take you back when I was 17 years old, before I was 18. So that's a long time ago, wasn't it? I was over Murray, Kentucky, and I knew that I had signed up for the draft, but they haven't called my number yet. So I go to the draft board there in Murray, and I said, I want to volunteer for the Marine Corps. And they said, well, your number hadn't come up yet. I said, I don't know, wait until it comes up. I want the Marines. I thought I did anyhow, because I was listening to our little Silvertone radio, battery operated back then. We had no electricity. And I could hear an old gentleman, and some of you older ones may remember Walter Winchell. Walter Winchell would be telling about so many thousands of Marines were losing their lives in the Pacific in defense of you to be one day. And now you're here. Okay, then finally they said, well, if you want the Marines, they called me up and they sent me to Evansville, Indiana, passed the physical. I'll tell them I want the Marines. And they said, well, you have to go to Indianapolis, Indiana. I'd never been to Indianapolis. I go to Indianapolis. I'm sworn in the Marine Corps. And then I show up in San Diego, California, and go through boot camp. And after boot camp, they said, Private Harrel, you've been selected to go to sea school. Okay, what did that mean? That didn't mean that I was smart or anything, but that meant that I'm going to be seagoing. And so after sea school, they sent me up to San Francisco. And there was that big USS Indianapolis, twice the length of a football field. That's pretty big, isn't it? And that's to be my home for the duration of the war. I was at Saipan soon after, Tinian, Guam, Sea Battle of the Philippine Seas, where our task force shot down 403 Japanese aircraft that day. I was down at Peleliu. I was at Iwo Jima. I was at Okinawa, 3 airstrikes on Tokyo. And lastly, and this kind of is my story. I was the Marine Guard aboard the Indianapolis on July the 16th, 1945. That's a long time ago, some 72, 3 years ago. And from there then I'm in San Francisco. Soon after, I went to those many, many places, but it was after Okinawa where we had received a kamikaze plane. That means a suicide plane. And believe me, I can nearly see that plane today. The boatswain blew the whistle, set emergency condition in the anti-aircraft batteries. And I look up and I see a plane diving, and they said within 12 seconds he hit. And one bomb went all the way through the ship. It went out the bottom of the ship. It went through the mess hall, a berthing compartment, water distilling plant, went out the bottom of the ship, and the big shafts that turns the screws, it hit that and exploded. A big gaping hole there. Yes, and the ship began to fill up with water. But anyway, the plane was blown up. There was body parts scattered everywhere. And they had to seal off that compartment. Okay, now then from there, we had to come to the States because we had a big gaping hole all the way through the ship. And the screws on one side of the ship couldn't even operate, so the two on the other side with the rudder just right. We came back to the States. We got repaired, and on July the 16th, 1945, I'm a Marine corporal now. And we saw a big, big box. I mean big, maybe 12 feet long, maybe 4 feet or so high, 4 feet or so wide. Our crane reached over and set that on the dock, and my Marine captain said, "Corporal Harrel, follow that into the port hangar deck." "And what is it, Captain Parks?" He said, "We don't know," and we didn't know. I stationed a guard to guard that big box, and then momentarily there were a couple of men coming aboard, and they had Air Force uniforms on. And again, they had a little metal canister, a little metal something in a metal cage with a padlock on it, and they set that on the quarterdeck, and a couple of sailors came with a steel rod, and they put it in that, put it on their shoulders, and took it up to an empty room, so to speak. Again, my Marine captain said, "Corporal Harrel, follow them up." I happened to be on duty. I was the corporal of the guard for that 4-hour period, and he said, "Follow them up to a certain room up there and station a guard." Now, Captain Parks, who are they? And what are we guarding? Okay, let me say this. They were not Air Force officers. They were scientists from Los Alamos, New Mexico. You know what happened at Los Alamos, New Mexico? That particular day, July the 16th, 1945, the first successful atomic explosion at Los Alamos. We had a bomb aboard our ship. 10 days later, we delivered that to our B-29 base on Tinian Island, there in the Pacific. After we delivered that, then our ship was the flagship of Admiral Spruance, and we knew the scuttlebutt, and that is that we knew that the word was that we were going to land 2 million troops on Japan, but no one knew at that moment what we had been delivering. President Truman at the time knew. Winston Churchill knew. Maybe the captain of our ship, he had some idea, but he did not know for sure. But nevertheless, we have delivered that now, and here we're going to the Philippines for the main invasion of Japan. But about 14 minutes past midnight on July the 30th, 1945, Commander Hoshimoto was waiting out somewhat at the crossroads from, Guam to the Philippines. He had not been successful the whole war of getting any ship. And he had one of the newer, best submarines that Japan had. And he was eager, anxious, waiting for someone maybe that would come through that particular area. And he had 6 torpedoes loaded. Now, the Indianapolis has no underwater sound gear. So we could not pick him up because he dared not to come to the surface. All he did was stick his little periscope up through the water. We couldn't detect that, but he was watching us. At about 14 minutes past midnight, he tells the crew, code red, stand by, fire, 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 fire. Every 2 seconds, he said he fired a torpedo, 6 torpedoes. Okay. Now, I had gotten off a watch at 12 o'clock that night. Now, we had been traveling some 32 knots, let's just say 33 or 4 miles an hour. And for a ship, that's pretty fast. But here we are now. We have delivered our cargo, and we're going to the Philippines. And we nearly had burned up the motors, and they said, we have to slow this ship down. And so we were going about 15, 16, 17 miles an hour. Now, it's 110 degrees outside. We have no air conditioning aboard the ship. A good captain came on the speaker at the close of the watch in the afternoon, evening. He said, you have permission to go topside and make your pallet right out on the open deck. So when I got off a watch that night, I went to my marine compartment. I get my blanket. I didn't get my Kapok life jacket. I don't need that. And I go topside. I go all the way forward. Later you'll see the picture of my ship, what it looked like the moment that it was hit. Well, Commander Hoshimoto fired 1, fired 2, he fired 6. I was sleeping under the barrels of number 1 turret. When you see the picture, you'll see that big 8-inch guns, 3 barrels up there. I'm sleeping right down on the deck under that. And that first torpedo cut the bow of the ship off. When I say it cut it off, it cut some 30 feet of that ship off, and we're about 30 feet wide at that point. We're 2.5 decks deep. And now I have to get ahead of the story just a little bit, and then I'll try to come back. But recently they found the Indianapolis. And I've told them through the years, when you find the Indianapolis, I knew that National Geographic had been looking, because they came from London and they interviewed me some 4 hours. And I said, when you find the Indianapolis, you're going to find that the bow of the ship is cut off. How do you know? I was there. I was sleeping under number 1 turret, okay? They didn't find it, but it was found nearly 2 months ago now, and or about so. And what did they find? They found the ship 3.5 miles down there. That's the deepest part of the Pacific, there at that Marianas Trough. Okay, I was so eager to, they called me and said, Mr. Harrel, just called to tell you that They found the Indianapolis, and I think my expression was, "Thank you, Lord," or "Praise the Lord." And I was eager to see. You know, when I saw it, I saw the bow. The ship wasn't there. Where was it? It was a mile from the ship itself. And I said it wouldn't be on the ship. They thought I was crazy. I'd written 2 books, and I knew that bow of the ship was cut off. Okay, now then, I'm sleeping topside, and Commander Hoshimoto cut the bow of the ship off, and now what am I going to do? Okay, momentarily I knew that first torpedo cut that bow of the ship off. I could hear the bulkheads down below breaking. I mean, literally, if you could imagine, those 4 big screws are pushing, and we are 2.5 stories deep, about 30 feet wide, and all that water is coming in. You could hear everything taking place down below. And I know that I've got to get to my emergency station, which is back midship. But as I started back to my emergency station, there were those who were coming out of the area in the forward part of the ship on the main deck. Most of that was officers' quarters. And as they were coming out, they were in just their night skivvies, and many of them were flash burned, or they had put their hand against a hot bulkhead, left the skin of their hand on the bulkhead, and they're pleading for some assistance. Now, that's really not my responsibility to give them any assistance, and really nothing that I knew that I could do. I had an emergency station that I must get to in a hurry, but by the time I could get there, I knew that the ship was sinking. By now, it's beginning to list to the starboard, to the right, and even by now, there was water on the open deck forward. I get to the quarterdeck. I realize I don't have a Kapok life jacket. Mine is down in the Marine compartment locked up in my locker. I see my Marine lieutenant there. I said, "Lieutenant Stauffer, permission to cut down all kinds of big canvas bags full of Kapok life jackets." His response was, "Not until we get word to abandon ship. The ship is sinking." And then momentarily, I saw a naval commander coming through the hatch, and I could tell that he was burned, flash burned, and some sailor hollered out, "Get the commander a life jacket," and they began to cut those down. I managed to reach in and get me a Kapok life jacket, and wait, realizing that there's no electricity aboard ship now. All of that is out. The only lights that we had was the inferno, burning, things exploding, and it was chaos. And we're looking up from where I am, looking up to what I call that big crow's forward area, where I knew the the Navy Captain Parks would be, Captain McVeigh would be, and waiting, hoping that word would come to abandon ship. Well, word is not coming, and some 10 or 12 minutes now has passed, and finally word trickles down, permission to abandon ship. Well, by now, the quarterdeck normally on the starboard side would be 8 feet above the water, but we are listing to where there's water on the quarterdeck. And so you know the ship is doomed. And so when word came down, abandon ship, you rush over to the high side. And I can recall getting a hold of that steel cable, looking out into the blackness of the night, looking out into eternity. Life is over. And may I say, there's times when you pray, and there's times when you pray, and there is a difference. I'm holding onto that rail. Boys is climbing over me, jumping into the water. but as they jumped in, it's a half inch of that black oil on it, so they're going to get that all over their face, and they're going to wear that. Yes, no way to get that off. But I'm holding on to that rail, and I'm praying, and I tell the Lord, whom I knew, I'm telling him, I don't want to die. I got mom and dad back home. I've got 6 younger brothers, an older sister and a younger sister. I don't want to die. I even tell him that there's a certain brunette back there that says that she would wait for me. I have to get ahead of the story and say, and she waited. After the war, we were married, 1947. Okay, we just spent our 71st wedding anniversary. May I say, she's still waiting. I told her bye an hour ago. I'll see you later. Okay, now then. From there now. I'm in the water. I leave the ship, and I watch as the bow goes under. That fantail comes high in the air. Those 4 big screws are still turning. I see boys jump off. They looking down into the blackness of the night. They couldn't see those screws turning. From down here, we're looking up at a little silhouette of light, and we could see, and not close enough to say, don't jump. We saw boys jump. Some jumped into those screws, and you could imagine what's happening there. I watched the ship as she went completely under, and after she's gone, I swam away from where it went under to find the first buddies out here. It isn't long till I found a little group of boys, more joining them, and it isn't long until we had a pretty nice little group, maybe about 80 of us. And the first thing I wanted to know, any Marines? Well, there were 2 Marines. One was a new boy that had come aboard. I didn't even know who he was. He came aboard maybe at Pearl or at Guam when we came through. We had transferred some boys off. I saw him and I knew pretty much his condition. He had been blown against a bulkhead. He had no doubt multiple breaks in his body. I tried to caress him and assure him that, help would be on the way. Hang in there till daybreak. But may I say, he pretty much passed into eternity there with me holding him. I found another Marine. He happened to be a newcomer also, but he had been aboard a month or 2, and he was in my squad. I was his squad leader. But my buddy Spooner had gone into that oil head first, and now he has all that oil in his eyes. And if he rubbed that oil in his eyes, he look up at that 110-degree sun, and that sun is dry in that salt water, and that salt water now is powder, salt, rough, and he rubbed that, and now his eyeballs basically are like bleeding, and that's my buddy Spooner. I'll get back to him a little later. Okay, now we go through that night. We lose several boys during the night. Daybreak comes. We've lost several boys. Many do not have life jackets, and they're hanging on to a buddy. Many of them have the little Mae West jackets, and they had worn them so much that now where they had been folded, all of a sudden they find out that they're leaking, and say they don't hold enough air to hold them up, so they're having to hang on to someone. Okay, let's go through that first night, the first day. The first day you look out and you see a big fin swimming around, and in fairness to the sharks, they aren't attacking us, but just to see them out there, they could. And it isn't long until someone maybe has broken out of the group and he's out 50, 75 yards, and you hear a blood-curdling scream, and you look and you see that kapok goes under, and momentarily, like a fish cork, that kapok brings the body back to the surface, and they had fins, all kinds of sharks, blood, and finally that kapok brings that body back to the surface, but the condition of that body is something else. And so you don't go and check to see who your buddy might have been. You wait. You don't dare the sharks. Okay, let's go through that. All right, went through the first night before the first day. Now the first day's come to the second day. How many of you have ever been thirsty? You really have ever been thirsty? Have you been so thirsty that your lips are parched open, bleeding, full of oil, and you're desperate for some water? You dare not drink that salt water. Why? Because you saw a buddy that says he cut off some of his clothing, had a patch of cloth, and he put some salt water up there and that, and he put his head under it, and he drank it. He said it's not bad. It's about 85-degree water, and it's water. But just wait. Within the hour, you can imagine what's happening to him. He doesn't know straight up. He doesn't know his best buddy even. And maybe he would see a buddy that he would know at least by face, but he would think he's got a canteen of water in his backpack, and he goes over to him with a sheath knife and he stabs his buddy. Blood. Or I saw one that attacked his buddy for various reasons. He didn't know who he was. And so blood, sharks. Now let's go through that second day. Oh, sometime later in that second day, you know how often here in Tennessee it rains? And sometimes you can see it coming, can't you? You see the little cloud, and it isn't long till, yeah, it's raining. Okay, here was our case. We saw a little rain cloud that second day, and so what do? I'll tell you what you do. You thank the Lord for a few drops of water, and how much water can you catch in your open mouth? And you got all that oil on you. You take your oily hands and you kind of funnel some of that water, and you drink a few tablespoons, no doubt, of water, and it's pretty good as it comes in and as it goes down. But after just a little bit, you know what? It says we've got to come out, that oil, and it comes out. Okay, let me take you. Well, I want to pause just a minute right there. Sometime the second day, I mentioned my buddy Spooner. My buddy Spooner, he couldn't see. His eyes were open. He couldn't close them. But it finally was the point that with that oil and with the blood, he couldn't see. And he's pleading with me. And I said, Spooner, hang in there till morning. Well, he didn't think that he could make it. And finally I realized he's going to do something harmful to himself. He said, I'm going to swim down so far, Harrel, that I'll drown before I come back up. And I knew that he was of the mind to do that. And I said, Spooner, you're not going to do any such thing. There's only 2 Marines in this group, and there's going to be 2 Marines when help comes, and help is going to come. And I tied him onto me. I swam with him through that night. Now we come to the third day. Okay, how many did I say we started out with? About 80. Okay, what's happened? Shark, dehydration, hypothermia. At night, it's 85-degree water. But if you don't have clothing on at night, You know, you get out here tonight and you get soaking wet and you just sit out there for a few hours and see what happens. You won't make it. You won't make it. And so that is the case with us. Okay, so let's go through that third night now before the third day. The third day at noon, 17 of us. 17 of us. That's all that's left. 17 of us. And what can we do? Our kapok jackets are nearly gone. They have some buoyancy, but it's just like that old sponge. You think it won't hold any more water, but it will still float. And by us keep swimming, keeping our head above the water, we're making it. But finally one sailor says, we have to pray. He says, we have to pray. And he prayed, and his prayer was something like this: God, if you're out there, we have to have help. He says, I've got a son back home that I've never seen, and we have to have help. Okay, now then, so what do we do then? We take off our kapok life jackets. Now, if you don't know what an old kapok life jacket is, you know what an old horse collar is. The kapok life jacket is something like an old horse collar made into a vest. You put that on. But so here we are now. We take our old kapoks off and we put them down under us. We sit in them. They still have a little buoyancy to it, but now then you have to keep swimming to keep your head above water. And now you don't have the strength. You've had no water. You're dehydrated. You've had nothing to eat. And now there were 17 of us. Okay, you know how you can hear out on the water, believe me. You can hear things that aren't there. You can see things that doesn't exist. But we heard voices and we looked. And yeah, look. And it looked like a little raft. And we could holler at them. They back at us. And it isn't long till they're closer. We're getting closer to them. They came into our group. And we could see it was a little makeshift of a raft. But no one was on the raft. No one was on it. But there were 5 sailors hanging on to it. And they were plugging away. Well, what was on the raft? And what was the raft? Okay, the raft consisted of 40 millimeter ammunition cans, 3, and maybe, 2, 3, 4, 5 old slatted orange crates or potato crates, and they had lashed those together. And, okay, what for? They would take a kapok jacket off of that boy that had already expired and get his dog tags and say maybe the Lord's Prayer and commit him to the sea. And they have his dog tags, but the guy that they gave them to, he's gone now. And so anyway, here we are. And okay, sometime then that third day when there were only 17, that little makeshift of a raft came in. And when it came in, we thought, thank you, Lord. And they came in and they said, we have to get closer to the Philippines. The Philippines is someplace there in the west. And we didn't know it was another 500 miles, but they said, anyone want to join us with this little makeshift of a raft? I looked at that little raft, and now they asked us to do this: take off your kapok life jacket, and they would squeeze that in the opposite direction, and it's like you ladies, you know that old sponge won't hold any more water. You squeeze it out, it'll hold more water. And they had squeezed out our kapok jackets, took one off of that raft that was much drier than what we were wearing. And now we put that on, and we could feel that, it's pulling our heads out of the water a little more. Okay, that raft came in. Anyone want to join us? I say to my buddy Spooner, I'm going to go with him. He said, Harold, if you go, I'm going with you. Okay, the other said, you're crazy. You're not going to push that raft to the Philippines. And maybe I already said that we didn't know it was another 500 miles. But when you see a group of 80 go down to just 17, and now you see a little raft here that have invited you to go with them, Spooner and I joined them. May I just say this, 15 boys did not agree to go. 15 boys never made it. Never made it. 2 of us that joined those 5 sailors, we think that we're going to make it, and we did. Now, later on that afternoon, we came up on a swell, and I'm up in the front of that little makeshift of a raft, holding on and plugging away, and we are probably in 8-foot swells. And we came up on the swell, and I could look off at a distance, and I said, look, there's some debris out there. Wonder what that could be. And so after a bit, I said, I'm going to swim out and get it. Well, what could it be? They thought I was crazy, but there was a compelling influence say, go and see what that might be. And I put my kapok on now, and I do a dog paddle, and I'm swimming out. Yeah, finally I get out to that old crate, and here it is, an old potato crate. And when I saw that, and when I saw those potatoes floating in that open top, I didn't pause. Thank you, Lord, for what I'm about to partake of. But in desperation, I reached in, got a hold of that first potato, and kindly in the agony of the situation, as I squeezed that potato, you know what? It was rotten, but was solid on the inside. And then to take that potato and peel it somewhat with my hands, and then take my teeth and peel it more, and finally it's solid on the inside. Now, may I say, that's all the water and food that I had for 4.5 days in 110-degree water, swimming. Okay. Now then, so sometime then when that little raft came in, anyone want to join us to go to the Philippines? Here, Spooner and I have joined them, and we have made headway. And then sometime later that night, the seas calmed down. Everything was quiet and calm. And so, no doubt, with a kind of a new life jacket, we, for some reason or other, we've turned loose that, and we're kind of drifting away. We're swimming to keep our heads out, but it's dark. Now daylight. Now, where's the raft? Yeah, where's the raft? Where's Spooner? Don't know. And I'm desperate. Oh, I have to back up and say, sometime later that night, just before that, about 1 o'clock or so, when it was so dark, you could hear voices again. And okay, it isn't long that we could touch base with them. They to us, they came into our group, and we tell them, we have a little makeshift of a raft here, but there was a certain Marine that had a dungaree pockets full of half-rotten potatoes, and he shared those with a Navy lieutenant that he knew aboard the ship, Lieutenant McKissick from Texas. And oftentimes, McKissick was the officer of the day, and here I was the captain's orderly, and McKissick would give me a message to give to the captain, and he'd have me to repeat it. You know how hard it is to repeat something someone tells you, and especially if you don't know really what he's talking about, which I didn't. I was a newcomer. And so McKissick was a buddy there. And so here he and one other sailor now the next morning. Where's the raft? Where's Spooner? Don't know. I'm with McKissick. And it isn't long I see this sailor, I see what just happened. His head had dropped in the water. I shook him and tried to encourage him. He responded, but could care less. A few minutes later, the same thing. The third time, it's too late. He's gone. So it's just McKissick and myself. And McKissick could say, hey, Marine, you ever been to the Philippines? No, never been there. And the good Joe that he was said, well, when we get there, he promised to kind of take me under wing and so on and so on. So we are kind of wondering what is happening. Where are we? We see our B-29s flying at 30,000 feet. You can't hear them, but we could see the trail up there. And we know that they're bombing Tokyo, and they've been doing that for a good period of time. And so anyway, McKissick and I are, by now, we are seated in our kapok jackets now, and we are struggling to keep our heads above the water. And then all of a sudden, I hear a plane. Look, 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 look. I see a plane, and I saw a plane. Okay, let me take you up there, though. Lieutenant Gwynn, flying that Ventura out of Palau, was out on a search and destroy, and that plane was a twin engine with wheels, and here he's up, 3,000 or 4,000 feet or so, but down enough that we could hear him anyhow. And let me tell you what was happening up there. He was looking forward of him, let's say 4 miles. He was looking out at his peripheral vision, 2.5 miles, so to speak, each side. He's looking at 20 square miles. Well, what could you see down there at that distance? 6 by 8 inches, a man's head. Impossible, yes, but I spoke to the 100th anniversary of the Boy Scouts out in Spokane. There were only 4,700, and we had a good week out there with them. And I said, you know what he saw, young man? I said, he saw your little mirror. He saw the sun hit that oil that was on your clothing in that water, and Lieutenant Gwynn rushed back to take over control, or asked the co-pilot to take over control of the plane because he was having trouble with his radio. He couldn't reach back at Palau. The stabilizer on that antenna had come off, and it was just flipping back and forth. And he tells the co-pilot to take over. I'm going to go aft. I'm going to pull in that antenna trailing behind the aircraft. I'm going to put a stabilizer on that, or we can't reach back at base. Okay, when he does that, when he goes aft to pull in that antenna, he looked down at a split second, and he saw the oil slick down there. He rushes back to take over control of the plane, and he gets on the speaker, load the bombs, load the bombs. We see him, we think he's coming in for us. He's coming in on a bombing run, literally, and when he gets down then several hundred, maybe a couple of thousand feet down, he sees debris. He sees boys. Later he says he saw boys over about a 25-mile distance. And he saw more sharks than boys, sharks attacking boys. But let me take you down with McKissick and myself. we're waving, thank you, Lord, he's coming in. And he came in. And when he came in, he circled us. And believe me, I can see Lieutenant Gwynn in that Ventura as he circled us 3 or 4 times, and he tilts those wings, and he says, I know you're down there. I can't land this plane with his wheels. And he goes back up, and he goes back up. He had said he had to go up nearly 7,000 feet to be able to get his radio to reach Palau to announce ducks on the pond. Whose ducks? No one knows. But he reaches back in Palau, and he gets a hold of Lieutenant Adrian Marks, who was a pilot of a PBY. And he tells him our coordinates out there, and he tells him, Marks tells him, said, oh, that's 150 miles, but I'm loaded and ready to go out on a search and destroy. I'll be there by a certain time, and so on. And Gwynn says, well, I only have so much fuel. I may have to leave, but I'm going to hover over all of these until you get here. But it isn't long till Mark's coming in. He passes over a destroyer, and he tells them ahead of you at a certain coordinates, there's boys scattered everywhere. And Commander Clater says, I'll be there just as quick, as fast as I can. And he turned on it at night. He turned on his lights up under the clouds, and he's coming. Marks is coming in then now, that at a different time, but Marks finally came in there in the afternoon before the ship came in then that night. And when Marks came in, he says that he could see boys, yes, scattered 25 miles. Some were maybe on a floater net, and there were several. We dare not to set a plane down close to them. They'd sink my plane. And he saw a few stragglers. He saw sharks. He's on the phone. He radios Palau and asks permission to set that big goose down in the open sea. And they tell him, no way. But he and the crew argue, but they're being eaten by sharks. We have to land. And may I say, Adrian Marks and his crew, they went against headquarters in Palau. And I can see that big goose. Even today, I can see that big goose as it's coming down, and he's slowing it down, and that tail of that aircraft is down, and those 2 props are holding it up, and then finally he's down and slowed it down as much as he could, and then that tail of that aircraft hit maybe an 6 to 8 foot swell, and when it did, it pitched him, and that right wing prop would never run again. But he's got the one motor now, and all he can do is run the swells. He dares not to turn that in against a bank of water, so he runs the swells. He's picking up stragglers. I knew that he had picked up McKissick, but there was a swell or 2 between us, and I was in hopes he would tell him there's a Marine out there with me. Well, he no doubt did, because it isn't long until that one prop has crossed over a swell, and he's coming down a trough, and they came down, they pitched out a little ring on a rope to me, and I got a hold of that. I somehow came out of that kapok jacket. They pulled me over, pulled me into the plane. Now, it's just like setting a sack of feed against another sack of feed. No one could stand up, but most couldn't even sit up, and we're just stacked in there. And I get in there, I look across the plane, and I recognized a blonde-haired, headed boy with big sore eyes, my buddy Spooner. And I saw what Spooner was doing. We had drank already. They had drank all the water that they had. They didn't have much. But Spooner had a can of green beans, and he was feeling down on the deck of that aircraft, and he found a little stud bolt or something down there. He finally knocked a hole in that can of bean juice. He's turning it up and drinking it. And I know it's Spooner. He couldn't see me. And I said, Spooner, how about some of your bean juice? Well, he unkindly or kindly told me where I could get off. Spooner, you don't know who this is. This is Harrel. I was his squad leader. Well, he kind of fell across a buddy or two with his bean juice. Okay, now they picked up 56 of us. You know anything about the fuselage of a PBY? If you do, you would say, it won't hold 56. I would say it will if you tie 7 out on the wings. I've got a buddy over at Chattanooga was one of the 7 they tied out on the wings. Okay, at least he picked up 56, kept us safe until morning. We transferred aboard a destroyer, and they take us down to Palau. We're in the hospital in Palau for just a day or two, catch a hospital ship. They bring us to Guam, and now I'm in the hospital in Guam. Okay, we were sunk on July the 30th, about 14 minutes past midnight. Now, August the 6th, I'm stretched out on a stretcher, wrapped with Vaseline gauze because I'm just rotting away. Any place, anything irritated, it was all festered up and bloody, and I'm on this cot, and they had me, my legs tied down, my arms tied down, and I'm basically wrapped in Vaseline gauze. And someone from the Louisville Courier-Journal was seated over there, knowing that I was a Kentuckian. He had been there a little bit, inquired. And he said, hey, Marine, he was asking, do you know what that cargo was that you were transporting? No, we don't know. He said, you know today, August the 6th, Hiroshima. August the 9th, Nagasaki. August the 12th, or about so, the Japs are aboard the Missouri. The war is over. Okay, I'm picked up. I'm in Palau in the hospital there several weeks, and then finally get back in the States now, July the 30th, here it is, October the 2nd, finally, I'm back in the States, thinking that I've got 90-day leave, but that night, I just couldn't rest, and by morning, I was in misery, and I thought, oh, I can't wait until daybreak. I've got to go to sick bay. And daybreak came. I managed to get a hold of the sergeant that was in charge of it. I told him, I've got to go to sick bay. Something is not right. I haven't slept all night. I've been just rolling and tumbling. And so end up, ambulance take me to Balboa Hospital in San Diego from the Marine Corps base. They checked my blood count, and they said, we can't operate. Can't operate? No. But they said, we've got a new medication that we'd like to basically try on you, Marine. Okay. You know what penicillin was? I didn't know until then. I became a pin cushion for the next 29 days. They gave me 11,800,000 units of penicillin. They nearly gave me up different times there in the hospital, in Balboa Hospital in San Diego. But the good Lord was watching over me, and okay, I came through that. And then finally got back home, I think January the 16th or something now in 46. Now then, there's so much more of the story, but I want to just read you one thing. And Adrian Marks and Lieutenant Gwynn, Marks that picked us up and Gwen that spotted us there in the water. Let me tell you actually what was happening up there. And here is their side of the story. Here's Mark's. What were the chances that Wilbur Gwen would fly a course which would take him directly over you? And what was the chances that his radio antenna would break while he was out on that mission? And what were the chances that he would open his bomb bay door and look straight down momentarily? And what was the chances that he would look straight down on one of you? You didn't have a chance in a million. I know that most of you prayed a lot, and I know that some of you feel that it made the difference. Amen. Yes, yes, yes. Wilbur Gwen is a wonderful man and a fine pilot. He never said that he heard a voice speak to him, but was there an unseen hand on his shoulder? Yes. Did he find you by pure chance? The odds against it are 1 in a million. Nay, 1 in a billion. But somehow he was chosen as the instrument to overcome these impossible astronomical odds. Wilbur Gwen looked down at the split second that would become one of the great moments of history. I, as well as you, am proud to know him as a friend. Any sensible person knows that no one can swim for 4.5 days, and yet you did. For 40 years I have reflected upon the blind courage and the unbelievable greatness of spirit that I saw when each survivor was brought aboard my airplane, and I have been compelled by the evidence of my own eyes to believe in miracles. Yes, may I say, yes, I believe in miracles. I likewise believe in the providence of God that was with this old 93-year-old World War II Marine back then and with me through these years down to this time. Now there's still much more about the story, but I think I've spent the time now giving you the main part of it, and I thank you. I thank you for your patience, and I commend you. I speak, as I said, to a lot of young people, but I observe that you know how to act when someone is speaking, and I thank you for your kindness. Yes, thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you, and I thank each of you, all of you. Thank you so very kindly. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
For current and exclusive content, subscribe to CDE Lightband, connecting you at the speed of light.